coming tonight. We have a wonderful presentation for you by our very own Matthew Linney. And he will be talking to us about seeing God and order from the chaos. But Matt is a PhD candidate, almost done, right?
Almost done.
In chemistry at UNC, and we'll be giving our talk tonight. So take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you all for being here. This talk, it's very disparate, so we have lots of different ideas that I feel like in my life have intersected, and so I tried to unify them as best I could. And frankly, I think it'll come across a little bit scattered, but my hope is that it'll just be because this will lead to a fun discussion afterwards. Okay, so it's called Seeing God. I don't know. I was working with a lot of different titles here. I wanted to begin with talking about Genesis and the flood. And so I think the flood story is often used by agnostics and atheists as a very clear example of what their community calls the God of the gaps. So like there's this very clear idea that a lot of atheists present, which is that theology is really a word that we have, that we put on everything that we don't yet understand. And so science has not yet mapped out everything. And so there's always little things that science doesn't get yet, but one day will. And in the past, we called that religion. So the rainbow. In the past, they didn't understand what a rainbow was. So they thought a rainbow, call that God, right? This is what the atheists would say about our society, is that everything that we hold dear as a theology is actually the study of what we don't yet understand. And so this is the God of the gaps argument, as they call it. So in reality, though, I think this is really what is going on, though. You get a whole bunch of people that look at something like a rainbow and they say, you know what, this is a phenomenon that can actually be described scientifically, and therefore that's it. Once it can be described scientifically, we now understand it. We understand every aspect of it. We understand what it is and what its purpose is there for. And so because they're in this category of perceived understanding, where because it could be modeled in a quantitative way, therefore God's not real. Because the rainbow could not have been a miracle because it's actually defined by this equation. And here we are. I think I'm speaking for this community of like learned, scholarly people. Even if you don't define yourself as such, I feel like by necessity as being a Catholic, you really are, and you belong in this category here, which is to say that regardless of if it's been described in a quantitative manner, it is still part of creation. So it doesn't matter actually how deep our understanding of creation goes. It is still creation, and so like a very fundamental Catholic idea here is that. Regardless of our knowledge of the material world, it could still be part of creation. So we could discuss at length recent discoveries in science, and they would all fall under the Catholic understanding of creation, because Catholic understanding of creation is fundamentally not one that talks about exact descriptors of like what things ought to be, but one that talks about like the purpose of creation overall. And so like that's like what this is kind of going to be about. Okay, so Augustine of Hippo, in his day was called Augustus Aurelius, was a North African Roman who wrote extensively about philosophy and about the natural world. And his life story is really intricate, and it's something that I'm very fascinated by, and I know a lot of people, Lance is really interested in him. This is a man who I think every modern Catholic is really needs to be interested in this man, and this presentation is going to involve him a lot. And so I'm hoping that by the end of this you will agree that we are kind of fundamentally at the same place where Augustine ended up at the end of his life, and our society needs to start from that point. And so Augustine, he's a doctor of the church, he's a saint, he was the bishop of basically all of North Africa, and just a really interesting guy. And something that he wrote a long treatise about fundamental ideas of understanding. And in this treatise, he presented this idea. Basically, I won't read the whole thing, but basically he says that there's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions about the movement of the sun and the moon, the kinds of animals, shrubs and stones, so forth. And And everyone has their own ideas like what these things are. And when a Christian makes a statement that's erroneous about these things, it's embarrassing. Because a Christian, their view about theology does not necessitate that they have a particular understanding about nature. More or less what Augustine is saying is that it's very possible to be a scientist. Actually, a lot of modern science is based off of precepts by Augustine. But if you are a scientist, you can fully investigate the natural world and still hold your theological values. And it's embarrassing when you have people that interpret Genesis or interpret any aspect of faith to mean something about a scientific cause and effect that can't be described otherwise. And so Augustine has a great, I'll just give an example, has a great essay or a short treatise called On Genesis. And in it, he asked the question, teacher, does the flood narrative describe an event that came and passed, and before this event there was no rainbow, and now there is? And if so, how can that be explained? Because is this a world where creation is changing, or does the flood narrative describe something that's pre-creation? And Augustine's response to this is to say that the flood narrative isn't one in which Catholicism does not necessitate that the flood narrative is a temporal event, at which time temporally before it there is no rainbow, and after it the laws of physics are changed such that there is a rainbow. Rather, it's a statement of the origin of the rainbow as a theological principle, right? So it's not like the time scale of Genesis is not such that there's so famously Augustine also says the days of creation are not actual days, right? This is a common early church teaching. And and so Augustine in that essay he also says another thing, which is that because creation is not temporal, we are actually part of it. And so the everyday events that you do, you drive to work, you engage your day-to-day life, that's part of creation. It's an ongoing thing. And when God created everything we see around us, it isn't a moment that was perfect and then becomes corrupted. Rather, it is ongoing at every moment, such that all of our reproduction, all of our local disruption of entropy, all of that is actually that's baked into creation. And so the aspect of creation is one in which it's not a beginning state that changes after that. It is the system that has entropy in it, to speak physically about that. But I really like this quote by him that talks about how the necessity for us to understand the physical world. So I just want to start with that. But yeah, understanding the physical world can be really complicated and really confusing. And there's a great non-theological work on this that was presented to me when I was growing up as a theological. Well, it's not openly theological, but the Augustinians that taught me growing up, this was used as a physical way of teaching theology, if that makes sense. And it's a short pamphlet, I guess you could call it, called or it's a short novel, I don't know, called a Flatland. And romance in 2 dimensions. Yeah, I know we all love Flatland. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend Flatland.
It's how I propose tomorrow.
So in Flatland, it's a story about dimensions. It's a romance in many dimensions. And so you have a square, and the square normally lives in Flatland, which is just confined to 2 dimensions. And the square approaches line land, a land he's never seen before. But in line land, there's just line segments of differing lengths and points. And so here is a scene from the novel where you have the king of line lands, a very, very large line segment, is approached by the square from a different realm. And but to the line segment, he can't perceive the square. Not out of ignorance, but because fundamentally his realm is not one that concerns 2 dimensions. There's no way in that universe, that self-consistent universe, for him to have perceived this square. So for him, he says, I can't see you, Mr. Square. You're outside of, and the square persists and says, no, I'm really here. Look, I'm here. And the line segment goes, no, you're only a point. Because as he comes down into the realm of the line land, he's just a point at this moment. And at most, all he'll ever be is a line. Because no matter how he's oriented in a one-dimensional confined space, he'll always just be a line segment. And that's pretty trivial. right? I mean, hopefully that is, but now you move into so then the square is approached by a sphere from the three-dimensional world. And the sphere, this is actually direct from the novel, this drawing. And so the sphere approaches the flatland. But to the square, the sphere is only ever a circle of differing size. And at most, there'll be a point, right? Because you can imagine the sphere sits just as a point on the flatland. So basically, from the perspective of the square, he will always have an erroneous concept of what he's observing, right? There's no way there's no direct observation allowed in this system that could perceive the full sphere reality. It isn't to say it isn't a sphere, right? I mean, from objective truth, it is a sphere. But from the perspective of the flat square, it will never be a sphere. But in the objective reality, it is, right? That's what we believe in, is the objective reality of that. Okay, so there was actually a big clock somewhere I saw.
Behind the TV.
Can I just pull that out?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. This is how this was taught to me, was with the clock, so I like using it. What is this shape? It's a circle, right? It's a circle. I mean, that's the right answer. That's the right. It's a circle, right?
Your question.
It's a complex three-dimensional shape that is roughly circular.
Okay.
Other details.
It's a cylinder, but okay, but
Closer to the
that's I get what you guys are going for. But what I'm really trying to talk about is okay. So yeah. I'm looking for other circular things. This is a circle, right? But this is a circle, right?
Don't spill it.
All right. But is it really? It's not. But think about it though. Like if I was to zoom in, like if I put this in the transmission electron microscope, look deeply at that edge. Is it really going to be a perfect circle? No, right? And is there anything then that's a perfect circle?
No. Yes. Concept.
The concept. Even if I had a perfect circle drawn here, digitally, would this have because it's like you could zoom in, you see the individual pixels, right? There's never going to be a perfect circle. And so when Plato taught this lesson in Plato's work, he says a compass can draw a circle, but it won't ever be a perfect circle. And yet somehow the author of that compass, that who holds that compass, has an idea in his mind of what he's making, right? So even though it'll never be perfect, Plato had no concept of pi. He had no idea of that's like 500 years after him. This isn't a math thing. He knew that fundamentally it'll never be perfect as you draw it, but there is another idea out there, right? And so today we think we're so smart because we think we are so much more educated over what Plato was speaking about, because we now have these descriptors. And so there's now a concept. We say, oh well, we solved the concept. This is the concept here as we show it. But even this isn't real. It's actually irrational. That's the term that the community uses. It's irrational. It's not even a real thing. It can't be drawn out, and a computer can't even solve it. It hasn't been solved. It isn't even. So this is actually a placeholder. This is actually a placeholder for reality, because the reality, having never been observed, right? It's never even been seen. The perfect circle has never even been seen. The reality, having never been observed, is still represented by this number. So we think that for all of our exploits, we've been to the moon, we put a rover on Mars, all this stuff. I admit all these great things have come from the exploration of the material world, but our exploration of the material world still cannot solve this fundamental thing. So what the name for all of this is like Plato's forms. Plato's this idea of like the form that something is like you can draw an imperfect circle and you pass it around. Everyone knows it actually represents a form of the circle, right? And so this is fascinating. This is something that has interested me so much. And I'm a material scientist, so I studied the material world. But this idea of immateriality is so connected to what I do that it's so like you can't separate those ideas out. And I'm like really curious about that. And so this is kind of like what I think about a lot. And so I'm just want to talk a little bit about this. So it's very easy to talk about this, about math stuff, circles, squares. I mean, that can be represented in an equation. But let's talk about it in a non-geometric sense. Let's talk about like this community. Okay, so if we all agree that circles are real, right? But if when I go to sleep and I'm unconscious, the circle is still real. Even if I'm not there to have thought about that form, the form persists. And when I'm awoken, it's still there. So me being conscious too, I could be dead, I could never have been born, whatever. It's still there. The form is real. That is the reality. And what we witness in the material realm is actually an imperfect representation of that reality. So like this is just speaking platonically about it. Let's talk about this community. If I was to fall asleep, if I'm unconscious, this community is still real, right? I mean, I won't be there to have been witness to it. So like in the flatland example, I'm not there to make the observation of that circle being there, right? If I'm unconscious or I move away, I never can interact with you all ever again. It's still real. That community is still real. And if each of every one of us was to fall unconscious to the idea of that form, that is this community, like what this community is supposed to be, then the community is still real. Because the form, what happens in the material realm is not, it's an imperfect representation of the form. The form is the actual reality. Because the form is the actual circle, right? We all agree that this is not going to be a perfect circle, right? So, okay, so once you understand that, then this can be interesting because it's beyond just a geometric example. It's about all aspects of reality. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be? There's a lot of questions we could go down. So this is called Platonism or Neoplatonism if we live in the modern world. So just to review this, without knowing the mathematical definition of the circle, man can still recognize the form. Plato, the pi thing is irrelevant. Plato's before pi. It's not got anything to do with the math of it. It's the forms are still there, and there's many things that haven't been modeled using math that are still subject to Platonism. If you are unconscious, the form persists. I could fall asleep, the circle is still real. I could never know about it, it would still be real. And if all of us fall unconscious, it is nevertheless still real. We could all be hallucinating, it would still be real. Okay, so this is called Platonism. Augustine of Hippo was really curious about this. He spent all his days investigating every possible theology and philosophy to try to come up with what he thought was the ultimate truth. And Platonism really fascinated Augustine because he felt it was like, he thought there was something there to it. And so he asked all these questions, where do these come from? You know, how can you have a form? So Augustine looks at this and he says, this has to be coming from somewhere. There has to be a source to this logic beyond the material world. There has to be another, an immaterial world, kind of, is one way of thinking about it. And what can we learn from that? And so Augustine wrote in City of God, none is nearer to us, the Christians, than the Platonists. He really felt that. And a great saying, I have read in Plato and Sisters sayings that are wise and very beautiful, but never have I read in either of them, come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. So basically Augustine looks at all this and he goes, the Platonists, they're really onto something. This is the truth, he felt. But where does it come from? And what does it mean for me and the community? Because Augustine, he couldn't live in a world without purpose. And if you really like think about this, it's like Augustine sees all this and he can't rationalize a world where there are forms and it's like some polytheistic or like the forms themselves are God. Like he couldn't get behind that. And I think this is really attractive. His logic is really attractive to us today. It's one in which the person who experiences reality is like at the center of the narrative. And I think that's like really, that's crucial to Augustinism, is this idea, is like how your experiences matter as like someone who experienced the theology itself. So anyway, Platonism and the church became integrated through Augustine. It's not, I mean, this is just one man's philosophy, but he was very influential in the early church. So just to give another way of thinking about something, Aristotle was another guy who lived, whose ancient predates Christianity by quite a bit. And Aristotle has a different way of looking at it. He says the forms aren't real. The forms are simply patterns or something like that the humans recognize for some reason that can't really be explained yet. But really what defines something is not a higher ideal that something is like strained to be. Like this is like strained to be a circle by our perception. What something really is defined by 4 causes. And that would be, so like an example of like this table here, we've got like the wood is like the thing. There's like a shape that it takes on, and the purpose and how it was put together. And so like this is kind of how he looks at all this. And so like an example that came up at lunch yesterday for me was somebody ordered lab-grown meat at this restaurant, and but yeah. So the question was like, oh, it's a beef, but it's lab-raised beef, and I'm like, wow. Very cursed, yeah, but highly cursed, chemically not sound, but not good. But and it is not replicating actual beef perfectly. That, needless to say, let's get that out of the way. But then I asked myself, well, what if it did? Man, that is interesting, because would it still be cow meat? So I think Aristotle versus Plato could answer that from their 2 perspectives. Aristotle says, yeah, that is cow meat, because here it's made out of the molecules, and the arrangement of the molecules is exactly the same, and its purpose is the same, and how it's put together, like the sinew or whatever. If it tastes like if it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it is a duck, right? Aristotle might answer that and say, yeah, it is beef, it is cow meat. But Plato might look at that and say, well, no, it's not meat of a cow. There is another idea out there, a cow, that was not cooked, right? This was not from a cow that got chopped up and cooked. So it's not, Plato would look at it and say, and Augustine too would look at it and say, no, it's not actually, because there's some greater truth to it that has not yet been uncovered. Like if you presented them to 2 people, if you presented 2 to one person and said differentiate, even if that person couldn't tell through experiment, Plato and Augustine would say they are different in reality, even though it hasn't been uncovered yet, right? Just a thought experiment. Okay, so the Platonic and Augustinian way of thinking says that there is a form out there that things are trying to like replicate, right? And so in science, this is really curious to me, because like all scientific experiments have like some, like they're not perfect, right? They're never going to be perfect. There's always some error and everything. And so, great guy, Gregor Mendel, Order of St. Augustine, he discovered genetics, and I'm going to butcher this in front of Lance, so I'm really sorry about that. So he discovered genetics, and he did it in a really in a way that I was reading some statistical papers about his experiment. So he's the pea plant guy. He used pea plants. The flowers color were different, wrinkly, not wrinkly, etc. He figured out that through the phenotype, the observed phenotype, the genotype could be inferred.
Good job.
Okay. But this friar, he's from Austria, or I think Austria. These numbers should have come out to 3 to 1, and when he did it, it's like 2 point. Yeah, they never come out to 3. It's not 3 to 1 when he did the experiment, and yet he drew these conclusions, which are by every modern understanding, 2023, perfectly accurate. Like no issue with the understanding he drew from it, but the actual observed data was not 3 to 1. It's like 2.9 or something. And so there's like statistician papers that are like still coming out today about this experiment from like 150 years ago. And they're like, how could this man have inferred reality from this inaccurate set of data? It's like highly improbable. It's called the Mendel paradox because of it. It's like how could this man have like known the truth before the experiment happened? And it's like, could he have cheated? It's like no, because like no one even had the idea before him. It's like, who is he copying? And so it's called the Mendel paradox. It's a real thing. There's a whole Wikipedia page for it. And But here's what it is. To a layman, this might not be obvious, but to this friar, it was so clear. Reality only approximated the form. And he drew out, and it's not as simple as saying there's a t-test with like these stats behind it, right? He was able to rationalize what was reality from an incomplete set of data, because the thing is, you were never going to get a perfect experiment. So this is just an example of order from the chaos, very Augustinian idea.
I grew tens of thousands, and it still never works out 3 to 1. So.
Okay, so if you will accept this, I want to talk a little bit about what I do. This is a structure of an alloy that I study that's really interesting to me, and it's two different atoms you can see arranged there. It's a metal and carbon, and this is the structure that was solved 100 years ago, and it's a very simple structure for the 1-to-1 metal 1 carbon 1 in this system. The stoichiometry being 50% the metal, 50% the carbon. But after this was discovered, the field entered into a long debate that lasted literally generations over what the structure was for the 2-to-1. So if you were to remove half of the carbons, what then is the structure? And the first person to take a look at this problem assign the structure to this here. We'll call this A. And A is, you can see, has a unique arrangement of these carbon atoms. It's different from this, it's missing half of them. Okay, so then there's actually another model that came out called B for now. And B, you can see, has another unique arrangement of the atoms. So there are actually different arrangements of the atoms, but the community couldn't decide on which one it was. Because the community in diffraction, which is, diffraction uses light that bounces off the planes of atoms, really similar to the rainbow actually. And according to this equation, and diffraction, if you were to make both crystal structures in like ab initio, like you think about them from first principles, they have the same exact diffraction pattern. And people debated literally 50 years, 70 years of debate about, oh, it's this structure. People were so adamant because they would look at this, they would look at one of these, like a team would look at this and say, oh, it's got to be this, it matches perfectly. Then another team would start from this one, they would say, it's got to be this one, matches perfectly. And this is pretty cool, but digging through, I was trying to fix this, I was trying to figure out which one it really is, right? Because Plato would say, well, it's got to be one, right? Experiment can't differentiate, but there's one reality, right? And Aristotle might look at it and say, well, no, it could be, it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. It can be both, right? But it really is one. So I found another paper from the 70s where the two different crystal systems, which in mathematics are called R3M and FD3M. These are a mathematical way of talking about them. For a different alloy, these researchers point out they actually have identical duplicates in all pair correlations to infinity. I'm like, what does that mean? These guys are geniuses, Richards and Kahn. They figured out that every atom has the exact same relationship to every other atom in an outward distance, exactly the same to infinity for both of them, even though they have different arrangements. And I literally was like, I went home that day. I was like, I can't think anymore. That's bizarre. I mean, imagine nature did that. I mean, someone did that. I mean, this is wild, right? Like, there's two different unique crystals that have the atoms are exact. Their relationship to every other atom in the crystal is exactly the same to an infinite distance for every unique atom. It's like, it blows my mind. But mathematically, it is sound. It took a lot of time to check that, but that is sound. So in reality, what you can do, you synthesize the material, you just make it, right? And in diffraction, this is the diffraction pattern. What this is, these represent the unique planes of atoms. And in model A, these are the different planes. And in model B, I separated the lattice out a little bit more to help show this. But the theory that was put forth by the model B people was to say that these planes were actually under each other. And so I had to separate them out to show this. But like, imagine the scenario where like these planes were like directly on top of each other. There's actually no way of differentiating, right? So I'm like, well, it's got to be one or the other. And I came up with this idea, which was actually, well, I didn't come up with the idea. I saw it in literature, and I decided to apply it to the system. But what you do is you can expand the lattice by flowing gas into it. And those cavities that are in the alloys expand, and because the alloys are different, they should expand differently. Like one should expand uniformly in A, B, and C. The other one should expand more in C than A and B. I didn't come up with that. A different group of people came up with that idea, but I applied it to the system. And so I used hydrogen gas, and it puffs up the lattice, it expands it, and you can see that there's a new set of planes that's exactly like the earlier one, but shifted to lower angles, which corresponds to an increase in the lattice, basically. And but because they're not split, so like in the model where it would have been B, instead of shifting, you should have seen it split. This new plane should become 2. If that makes sense. So this is like this proves that it has to be A, because only A would not have split. So through an indirect way of looking at it, you can see that it has to be A. And much like the flatland example, it's like the plane cannot see that it's a sphere. There's no way, any way of looking at it, there's no turning of the sphere, moving of the sphere up and down, doesn't matter. It'll always look like a circle. And yet, indirectly, it's possible to observe that it is a sphere. I mean, in this analogy, it's proving that it's model A. Okay, so that's enough about what I do. But I wanted to bring this up because it's an example of how this idea of like there has to be some truth, and we're going to seek it through changing our perspective, applies. Okay, so here's something cool. You'll notice that the planes they're not sharp. So the model says they should be sharp, but they're not. They're actually like wide in distribution. Why is that? I mean, because the diffraction thing, like the rainbow, is solved by an equation, right? Why isn't it just sharp? Why shouldn't, if the planes of atoms are defined in this rigid way, a crystallographic system, why are they not just like, why aren't they all just like the same, right? It's because it's disordered. Because the crystal doesn't represent, because there's a form, and we call that form FD3M is the mathematical term, but the form is a crystal system that reality doesn't match. I prepared it in lab, and I labored over it to make this crystal system, and it's imperfect in a way. It'll never actually be perfect. Of course, you can anneal it, you can play with it, you can make it perfect, but it'll never be perfect. It'll always have some width to it, because what those lower angles and higher angles show are that the planes in that case were like too wide or too narrow apart, right? So reality is like an imperfect representation of the immaterial world, is what this is to say. Okay, so then even if you look at this from the Aristotelian way, this isn't a form, whatever, Matt, you're wrong. It's actually it's actually metal atoms arranged in, this is the Aristotelian way, metal atoms in a certain space group, according to Matt's synthesis, has a purpose, right? These are the 4 causes. What is that purpose? And so I think it's useful for a battery. Okay, but then what's the purpose of that? So like modern secular science looks at this and says, what's the purpose of that? What's the purpose of that? What's the ultimate purpose of it? And then, okay, well, it's actually it's to make a clean energy. What's the purpose of a battery? It's for a clean energy thing. But what's the purpose of a clean energy thing? Clean energy system, right? What's the ultimate purpose? To human happiness? Like, this is an issue because it's like the Platonic form thing, but just in a different language. What is the ultimate thing that this is going for? Even if you have a secular understanding of it, and this is just for a battery, and the battery is just to make solar panels work well. What is the purpose of that then? Is it just for our own self-gratification? Like where is this arrow ultimately? I understand there's another thing after that, and that's to get to work on time with a rechargeable vehicle, whatever. I get it. The arrow keeps going, but ultimately, what is the purpose, right? And that cannot be answered using secular science. It can't be answered using science. There is no cause and effect that could be done that will answer that question, or the ultimate form question from Plato. Okay, and so this is really, I mean, this idea of the order from the chaos stuff is really Christian stuff. I mean, this really is reminiscent of Genesis itself. How could the unordered form yield this world? I'm gonna butcher this in front of Matt. I'm sorry, Matt, but there is no model today as for how the universe can exist using matter. So why is matter antimatter? are they annihilate when they come into contact, matter and antimatter. Shouldn't the world have just been annihilated immediately after the Big Bang if you had matter and antimatter expanding immediately? Like they would have been there has to be some like more complex aspect to this. It's non-uniform, right? There's some ordering to that expansion that would have yielded a world where there's discrete pockets of matter and discrete pockets of antimatter. I'm butchering that, but that's the understanding that's today, right? Yeah. Okay. So this is fundamental to like all of science cannot get past this question of the order thing. Okay, so Augustine looks at this issue, and I know Augustine didn't know anything about the Big Bang Theory, but he would have loved to hear about it because you think about in Genesis, the garden is the ultimate chaos from the perfect order. So Augustine's really into the original sin. This is his big contribution to Catholicism, is original sin. Or talking about. So Augustine looked at this and he said, well, this was the perfect scenario. How many times is it that you think, well, I'm angry today, but it's because I had my motorcycle stolen like a month ago. How many times did I wake up and I'm angry, I take the bus, I'm late to this, I'm late to that. I'm thinking to myself, if only those people hadn't stolen my motorcycle, I wouldn't be angry. Or I would be kinder to other people if I hadn't had my motorcycle stolen. Like, how we think, but so Augustine said everyone has these things they think about. And Augustine wrote in Confessions, I stole I didn't steal Augustine's Confessions begins with stealing these apples. He goes, I didn't steal the apples because I needed the apples. I stole the apples because I wanted to. This is like that, but much grander than what Augustine's own life was about. Here was the perfect scenario, the perfect ordering that God gives us. And what do humans do? We turn it into chaos. We look at the perfect garden that was given to us and we ruin it through our own fault. And this isn't a statement about two historic people. It's a statement about fundamental humans. Every man and woman does this every day in some form or another. And that's Augustine's big thesis, is that it isn't something to do with historic people that you can talk about in the past tense. Creation is an ongoing thing that you engage with constantly, every day, all the time, no matter what period you live in, if you believe in evolution or the Big Bang Theory or not, it doesn't matter. This is truer in another sense, is truer in a deeper sense than what could be observed using your eyes. And how about this? Is the exact inversion of that. Christ becomes man in a fallen world, in a chaotic world. There's no way my motorcycle being stolen is ever gonna. That's peanuts in comparison to this, obviously, right? So, but from this, what does he do? Is he angry? I mean, you look at everything that happens to us, and we think, oh, I would have been nicer. I would have been a good person if this and such just hadn't happened to me. This is the exact inversion of that. Here's someone that is a sacrificial lamb that saves us all via his own sacrifice, right? In the chaotic world. It's the exact inversion of the Garden of Eden, finally. So the whole thing is symmetrical and it ends in a happy way because of that. But that's the message of the chaos from the order. And so then here's another idea that Augustine would have been he was really concerned about is where is God the Father in all this? Is God the Father of the order? Is he the source of the order? What's going on here? Augustine himself was actually a Manichaean, which is a dead religion that Augustine, he flipped around a bunch of different religions, agnostic, Manichaean, Christian. He was raised Christian. He was doing it all. And then he ultimately becomes Christian again. And he converts from Manichaeism to Christianity. And he fought, he wrote many treatises against the Manichaeans. He was a thinker that he made it the end goal of his life to really combat this what he called a heresy. Because the Manichaeans, they integrate a lot of Christian teachings into Buddhism and Zoroastrianism. But Manichaeans, they believed that the world was just dualist. They believed that it was all just about darkness versus light, order versus chaos itself. That was all it was. That's the core of the Manichaean, Zoroastrian, and Buddhist philosophy, is that the world is just order versus disorder, and the God is order itself. And this is, if you ultimately, I don't really have time to get into it now, but ultimately, if you think about this long enough, this is a world that's totally devoid of your narrative. The world in which it's pure light versus pure darkness, God has no reason to care about your free will. And Augustine, he can't rationalize that, and he has an issue with that. It's a world where there's no come unto me all you who are burdened. And so he converts from Manichaeism. So Augustine's thesis, again, is to say that God is not order. God is a source of order. There's a really big difference there. God's not order, he's the source of order. That's a really Christian idea there. God's a person, not an ideal. It's not. And so this is interesting because just to kind of conclude this and talk about the modern day, I do think that we are fundamentally at the point where Augustine ended, because a lot of the struggle, I think that a lot of the struggle that's going to happen is going to be between people who are agnostic or atheist who are then going to become Buddhist. Or they believe that God is an ideal, God is oneness, God is order itself. That is actually the growing New Age religion mentality, is really in this idea that God, not being something that we can observe directly using experiment, must be the oneness itself. It must be order itself. So we're not going to have to come up against other Abrahamic stuff, but we're going to have to come up against that Buddhist concept. And so Augustine's thoughts on Manichaeism and Zoroastrianism really are going to be pertinent, I think, in the next generations. But Augustine, what happens after Augustine destroys Manichaeism, basically, and he takes all his money, he moves away from Rome. When Augustine was alive, there are contemporary Romans that talk about Augustine, and they call him Augustus Aurelius Vox Imperii. Augustine, the voice of the empire. That was his nickname, voice of the empire, because he wrote speeches for the emperor, who was like a child at the time. And he was so connected to the political sphere of Rome. He saw how corrupt it was. He saw it was not finding the ultimate truth, the ultimate whatever that was going for. He takes all his money, all his work, and he moves back to his community in North Africa, where this is him with his mother, Saint Monica, and he established what would now be called a monastic community. At the time, it was very new. And the role of Augustinians throughout the Dark Ages cannot be overstated. Truly immense work. From North Africa, Augustine sees the fall of Rome. His intellectual descendants see the fall of Rome in their hermit ascetic lifestyle. They're able to document all these stuff. And so a lot of the Platonic stuff, a lot of the work by Greek philosophers was preserved through monastic communities, which is really a beautiful thing. So I think today we are all like Augustine. We're like Augustine because we are striving in an intellectual sense. We're very interested in the physical world, but we're curious about morality and ethics and immaterial things as well. And like Augustine, we're willing to discuss this here and right now. And that's really I think that basically this idea of the order from the chaos thing and trying to see God using science and trying to rationalize that, we're still where he was. And so I don't have any new ideas, but I just wanted to present this as almost like a recap or my thoughts on this way of thinking. Yeah.
Awesome.